Hello, and welcome to another episode of my show within a show, the Quadruple D. And I'm continuing my look into the lives and the nature of dictators that I kind of started last time. And this time we're going to be looking at, well, largely North Korea, but at a little bit at a few other ones. So, China has announced a massive military parade in Beijing on September 3rd, 2025, so pretty soon, commemorating the 80th anniversary of Japan's formal surrender, Victory Day as they call it, marked aboard the USS Missouri on September 2nd, 1945. Unlike Japan, which observes surrender on August 15, China stages its grand military display on the following day, a symbolic reminder of its vast wartime trauma and ongoing geopolitical posturing. At this spectacle in Tiananmen Square, Chinese leader Xi Jinping will preside over tens of thousands of troops, advanced fighter jets, missile defense systems, and hypersonic weapons, demonstrating the PLA's enhanced new type combat capabilities. Ooh, how impressive! Can't you just hear the crowds going, ooh, ah, wow, that's so new and original. How do they do it, folks? How do they do it? Notably, the event will host around 26 foreign heads of state, predominantly allied to non-Western blocs. Among them are Kim Jong Un of North Korea and Vladimir Putin of Russia, who will make their first collective appearance with Xi at a multilateral gathering. And this marks Kim's first multilateral appearance since rising to power in 2011 and his first visit to China in 6 years, signaling renewed ties with Beijing amid growing military and economic cooperation with Russia. So, wow, it's a strategic alliance. And Moscow, in turn, has supplied arms and advanced weapon tech to Pyongyang, reinforcing both regimes' defiance amid Western sanctions. So, Beijing's guest list includes Iran's President Masoud uh, Pezeshkian, Indonesia's Prabowo Subianto, Belarus's Alexander Lukashenko, Myanmar's Min Aung Hlaing. Actually, I think it's pronounced like Ling, and others aligned with Russia or China. So I might have butchered some of those pronunciations, but you get the idea. The point is they have a lot of these strategic goons that will be attending, and Western representation is minimal. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico and Serbia's President Vucic are rare exceptions. So we don't have any of our goons going over there, any of our goofballs, whatever you want to call them. And China's foreign ministry lauded its decades long traditional friendship with North Korea, promising continued collaboration on regional peace and stability. Yeah, that's what they're up to, I'm sure. Regional peace and stability. That's why you need all these weapons and badass displays of all these wannabe Rambo types out there. Well, I don't know if they really have that much interest in Rambo per se, but I'm sure they have their own equivalents, these mythological, military tough guys who could go in and just set everything right just through the use of arms. You shoot people up, maybe bomb them, and wow, everything's right with the world. You can use the military to save the day every time. You muscle your way through every scenario, and might makes right. That whole thing. The true motive appears to center on bolstering mutual authority against U.S. influence, And it's a bit of a weird spot because I bet that Donald Trump would like to attend this event. I'm sure because he had that military parade, and that was widely regarded as a pathetic display. And these are people who know how to do it better. Not that I want to encourage these military parades because they're pathetic and they cost a lot of money. I guess Trump's cost almost $1 billion, or at least a $500 million. But it probably costs more than that if you take into account some costs that probably are not typically taken into account. And there's also the cost of dignity too. Like, not that I'm Mr. Dignity over here, but you know, there there's a such thing as things just being a little too pathetic to want them to actually happen. And I think military parades kind of function in that way. And they're also just a bad sign. It's a sign that society is becoming more authoritarian and just more dumb, you know? So, from a sanity standpoint, this parade is a glaring display of state power and militarism, the orchestration of mass soldiers in formation, broadcast as an authoritarian spectacle, serves to legitimize nationalistic and hierarchical regimes. Each participating leader reinforces the myth that unity stems from state centered, coercive military power rather than grassroots liberation or solidarity among people. So, Kim's visibility alongside Xi and Putin also signals a transactional solidarity among authoritarian states, mutually reinforcing each other's narratives of strength in opposition to Western liberalism. Yet beneath the choreographed displays lies a fragile holding together of regimes that rely on repression, global arms networks, and economic leverage to sustain their domination. And true security emerges not from parades or power blocks, but from horizontal cooperation, mutual aid, and yes, the exact opposite of these displays, which is demilitarization. That is actually how you create a stable society and world. So instead of celebrating wartime anniversaries with missile flyovers and leader theatrics, movements aiming for actual emancipation might focus on disarming the apparatus of states and dismantling structures that funnel violence through nationalist delusions. And, I just want to do a basic summary of what's going on here just to sort of recap. So there's a parade date that's been confirmed as of right now on September 3rd, 2025. So really just a hop, skip, and a jump away on the calendar. It marks the 80th anniversary of Japan's formal World War II surrender, Kim Jong un's first multilateral gathering since taking power, and his first China visit in 6 years. So, ooh, it's a star-studded gala, I guess you might say. The weapons to be displayed include fighter jets, missile defense, and hypersonic systems. Wow, think of that. How dynamic and how impressive. That's surely going to woo and wow the crowds. And the guest list includes 26 leaders, including Vladimir Putin, and only a handful of Western leaders, like a few. A light smattering of morons, I guess you might say. And, maybe there will be a few surprises at this gathering, but I don't know. It seems like it's probably going to be a predictable display. And China praises its traditional friendship with North Korea at at a press briefing and blah blah blah. You get the idea. North Korea's enhanced weapons development has been aided by Russia, and this strategic partnership stuff. It might sound good for some people, but these these countries will quickly stab each other in the back when they find the time is right. You know, all it takes is just a few little things to go wrong and they'll be at each other's throats. So, all of this singing kumbaya stuff, it it will fall short dramatically at a certain point in time because these are not peacemakers. They are people who want to basically torture the population. And that takes me to my second segment, which I call the peripheral poop head of the week. And this time we're going to be looking at Kim Jong il. So, North Korea is built atop a hereditary dictatorship cemented through Kim family's relentless grip on power. So, Kim Jong il, son of North Korea's founder Kim Il sung and father of today's leader, Kim Jong un, really exemplifies the dynasty's devotion to unearned authority. So, what do I mean by that? Well, the origins and the succession dynamic are really what I'm talking about. So, Kim Jong il was born as Yuri or Yura Ursenovich Kim, most likely in February 1941, in the Soviet Union, where his father was in exile. North Korean propaganda instead claims he was born on Mount Paektu in February 1942, a mythical birthplace conferring revolutionary legitimacy. And, I guess that's considered a lie, but the people in North Korea are encouraged to see it as being true. So, Kim Jong il was groomed from beneath the cult of his father, Kim Il sung, officially designated him heir, or he was officially designated heir in October 1980. He rose through the ranks, key positions in the Workers' Party, and armed forces followed swiftly. In 1991, he took command of the military, and when Kim Il sung died in 1994, he assumed absolute power. So, this led to enhanced authoritarian rule and militarism. Kim Jong il's era increasingly, did I say increasingly? Increasingly prioritized militarism over social welfare. Uh, the military first policy elevated the Korean People's Army to the central organizing force of state and society, with disproportionate resource allocation and direct influence over politics and the economy. So that's part of the authoritarian playbook in a lot of cases. And under his rule, North Korea endured one of the deadliest famines of the modern era. The Soviet collapse in 1991 ended vital aid, and flooding in the mid 1990s worsened food shortages. Between approximately 240,000 and 420,000 people perished during the so called Arduous March famine. In response, Kim unleashed internal purges. Through a secret police network, some 25,000 officials were targeted, roughly 10,000 executed, and 15,000 sent to labor camps, creating scapegoats for violent crackdowns rather than actually solving problems through legitimate means. Though largely trapped under isolation, the regime did open limited spaces for economic experimentation, such as Kaesong Industrial Park, launched in 2003, a joint venture with South Korea, but even this was constrained and vulnerable to political backlash. And of course, there was the cult of personality that developed even more under Kim Jong il. Kim was venerated as the dear leader, following in the shadow of his father's great leader status. After falling ill in 2008, by which point many feared for his survival, he died of a heart attack on December 17th, 2011. Though the announcement came 2 days later, his death ushered in his son, Kim Jong un, and posthumously Kim Jong il received hallowed titles Eternal General Secretary of the Workers' Party and Eternal Chairman of the National Defense Commission, enshrining his leadership forever into the state's ideological foundations. North Korea also celebrates his birthday as the Day of the Shining Star, a lavish biennial holiday marked by ritual, symbolism, and, of course, a bunch of nonsense. And, from a sane perspective, the Kim dynasty represents the antithesis of liberated horizontal social organization. Power remains within a bloodline. Dissent is erased through purges, famine, and ignorance. Propaganda rewrites personal histories and births. Militarism becomes the backbone of society, channeling resources away from the people and toward unquestioned authority. The eternal leader model reveals how political power can evolve into secular religion, where death does not end authority, it only sanctifies it. Of course, true freedom demands dismantling these dynastic authoritarian structures, not just replacing figures. We must challenge the ideological infrastructure, the cult of personality, hereditary succession, military supremacy, and all of that garbage. Only by forging communities grounded in mutual aid rather than fear can we stifle these legacies and step toward genuine liberation and sanity. Although I gotta admit, these stories about people like Kim Jong Un and Kim Jong Il, like if I remember correctly, there's a claim that he does not have or that he did not have bodily functions, so he didn't go to the bathroom and stuff like that. I've heard that. I don't know if that's just like a rumor or maybe propaganda against him. But basically the idea is that the sun does not shine unless the great leader wills it to shine. It's like it's a state religion instead of like more, I guess, traditional religion. All right, the third segment of this episode is the fetid fever dream flashback of the week. And we're not straying out of North Korea for this one because I'm going to be looking at Kim Il sung. So one could argue that Kim Il sung's entire political career was itself a continuous scandal. But if we're narrowing it down to what historians and analysts often treat as the biggest scandal, two would stand out probably. The first one is sort of the lighter of the two. It's the fabrication of his anti Japanese guerrilla legend. Not gorilla like the animal, but gorilla like the fighter. Those words have always thrown me off because they are definitely similar, even in how you pronounce them. But this is this is more about the myth making of his military record. So much of Kim Il sung's reputation was built on exaggerations and myths. His guerrilla activity against Japan and Manchuria was real but relatively minor. Soviet propaganda massively inflated his role to present him as the heroic great leader who single handedly liberated Korea. The scandal here is less about historical inaccuracy and more about the manufactured cult of personality that erased collective struggle and replaced it with the glorification of a single savior. This turned liberation into a state driven narrative, hollowing out genuine grassroots resistance against what they considered some oppressive force. The purges and consolidation of absolute power in the late 1940s and 1950s are actually sort of the more obvious scandal here with this particular leader. So after World War II, Kim Il sung eliminated rivals, independence activists, and communists who weren't loyal to him, and even his former comrades. This included brutal purges in areas linked to China, the Soviet Korea faction, and domestic communists who had actual grassroots support. So, as the anarchists would criticize the Soviet Union, uh, for getting rid of any actual communism, that was actually one of the interesting things about the Soviet Union. Uh, One of the first rats to be smelled there was they got rid of the actual communes, like the actual Soviets, and put them all under state control. So any possibility that the Soviet Union had of actually liberating the population was pretty swiftly debunked because the more direct democratic elements of the that revolutionary period were basically squashed. And when it comes to Korea or North Korea, if you look at it from sort of an anarchic lens, this was the quintessential scandal. The hijacking of revolutionary energy into a rigid, hierarchical, and authoritarian state. Instead of dismantling oppressive structures, Kim Il sung reproduced them, just painted them red and called them socialist. So the scandal isn't one moment, but it's the system that he built rather than, just, oh, let's narrow it down to this one thing that he did. No, it was really the overarching system and the ideology that he was crafting. By elevating himself into a quasi divine figure and institutionalizing hierarchy, surveillance, and militarism, Kim Il sung turned what could have been a genuine people's revolution into a state apparatus of domination, and we've seen that become goofier and goofier as time progressed. So basically, liberation was betrayed. Ordinary Koreans who had fought Japanese colonialism weren't given autonomy. They were handed a new ruling class dressed up in revolutionary slogans. Nationalism was prioritized over genuine autonomy. Kim's ideology claimed self reliance, but in practice it reinforced submission to authority, demanding obedience rather than empowerment. It was a scam. National self determination was used to justify dictatorship. So the biggest scandal is less a single event and more about the systemic theft of collective struggle by a leader who turned it into authoritarian rule. So Kim Il sung's regime wasn't a revolution at all, it was a counter revolution that replaced one master, Japan, with another, the North Korean state. And, you know, basically, we regard North Korea right now as nothing but a joke. Granted, it's a potentially deadly joke, but a joke nonetheless. And the potential for actual revolution there is, I don't want to say zero, but it's a very, very small potential because of just the nature of authoritarianism. And of course, they have very modern methods of keeping the population in check. And the prospect of any actual liberation there, again, probably not zero, but pretty close to zero. And that's one of the terrifying aspects of the modern age is that the potential that people have of actually advancing and becoming, I guess, free for lack of a better word, it's greatly reduced by the same technology that could potentially actually liberate people and better people's lives. The things that could be used for good are being used more often for evil, it seems. And unfortunately, I don't see that trend reversing too much in the near future. I hate to sound like I'm pessimistic, but reality does not paint the most optimistic picture, but I don't want to crush people's hopes. So I will say that, you just have to take the good with the bad. And when good things happen, you have to highlight them too, and sometimes you have to just try to make good things happen with whatever resources you have available. And although that can be tricky sometimes, it's still possible. You just need to make the effort, and you can't let the bastards grind you down.